The Dating Game Killer by Hollywood and Crime contains depictions of violence and is not suitable for everyone. Please be advised.
It might have appeared that Rodney Alcala's trip through the judicial system had ended with his 1980 conviction for the kidnap and murder of Robin Samsoe. In fact, it had only begun. While awaiting his death sentence, he was still charged with the rape of Monique Hoyt. After a short trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Considering his looming appointment with California's gas chamber, the additional time seemed an afterthought. Attorney Keith Monroe was appointed by the court to handle Alcala's appeals. His first line of attack focused on the kidnapping conviction, which formed the special circumstance making his client eligible for the death penalty. If he could get the charge overturned, the death sentence would be reduced to life without parole. The question hinged on whether Alcala had forced Robin into his car or lured her. Since there were no eyewitnesses, he argued, the state had relied solely on Alcala's purported jailhouse confession to fellow inmates. Monroe succeeded in getting one of the informants to admit in court that he and the other inmates had made up the confession in order to receive preferential treatment in their own pending cases. But in May 1981, trial judge Philip Schwab denied the appeal, ruling that the kidnapping conviction did not rely solely on the inmate's testimony. With the special circumstance still in effect, Alcala was returned to San Quentin to await execution. We are pleased to have Best Fiends as our presenting sponsor. I'm perpetually early everywhere I go. It's my lot in life. I wouldn't change it. But sometimes all that waiting around can get a little boring. That's why I like to pass the time by playing Best Fiends, the 5-star rated mobile puzzle game. It's a casual game with engaging puzzles, and it's a whole lot of fun. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. From Wondery, this is Hollywood and Crime. I'm Tracy Patton with Stephen Lang. If you're joining us for the first time, we recommend going back to listen to the previous episodes. We'll be waiting for you. This is episode 6 of The Dating Game Killer, the Alice's Restaurant Defense.
Rodney Alcala watches through the bars in his cell door as the paper plane glides along unseen air currents before disappearing from view. A note sent from one prisoner to another. If it ever finds its target, Rodney has no idea. But the motion of the paper is calming. It feels like freedom. At under 50 square feet, his cell is barely larger than the storage shed he rented in Seattle to house his stash of photographs. He has access to the recreation area for a few hours a day, gets to shower once every 2 days. The 500 or so prisoners on death row are kept separated, which is fine with him. His time is better spent learning the law, so he can help his lawyers with the motions that will one day set him free. By August 1984, Rodney Alcala has spent over 4 years on death row, while his attorney argues the automatic appeals in all capital punishment cases. And on the 23rd, he gets word that the California Supreme Court has handed down a 5-1 decision. It rules that in admitting his prior crimes, the court committed reversible error. The similarities between the earlier offenses and the Samsoe murder were not sufficient to allow their introduction at trial. They were, in fact, consistent with many cases involving sex crimes against children and not peculiar to the defendant. Therefore, the prejudicial impact outweighed the probative value. The justices conclude that absent this error, the jury might have reached a different verdict. Thus, the convictions are overturned, and the defendant must be granted a new trial. Rodney reads the decision several times, as if enjoying a passage in a favorite book. He has never doubted that he was treated unfairly by the system, and this is vindication. He steps back to the cell door and watches as another paper plane floats gently by, rising up out of view. This time he sees it as an omen, a symbol of the freedom that will one day be his.
Deputy District Attorney Tom Goethals was outraged when he heard Rodney Alcala had been granted a new trial. Everyone in the DA's office fumed, seeing the ruling as just another example of the notoriously liberal California Supreme Court. Over the decade-long tenure of Chief Justice Rose Bird, the court had overturned every one of the 64 death penalty convictions before it. When Goethals was assigned the retrial, he knew that if he couldn't admit Alcala's prior offenses into evidence, convicting him would be much more difficult. The deputy DA would soon be faced with another problem, one that had plagued prosecutors and investigators throughout. On April 23, 1986, the new trial of Rodney Alcala for the kidnapping and murder of Robin Samsoe began. The defendant took his seat at defense counsel table, and the jury filed in. In his opening statement, Prosecutor Goethals promised jurors they would be hearing from a witness who would place Alcala on the road near where Robin's body was found. But no sooner had the state begun presenting its case than both sides were summoned to the judges' chambers. Dana Croppa had asked to speak to Judge Donald McCartan outside the presence of the jury. Just before she was scheduled to testify, the former firefighter now claimed she had no memory of the events she testified to in the first trial. She asked to be dismissed as a witness. Prosecutor Goethals knew about Croppa's fragmented mental state over her many police interviews, but her testimony was critical to his case. Without it, he couldn't put Alcala on the road that night with a young girl fitting Robin's description. Goethals argued that Croppa should be examined by a mental health professional. The judge summarily ruled she was unfit to testify, but said he would allow her testimony from the earlier trial to be read to the jury. Alcala's new defense attorney, John Dolan, protested vehemently. He insisted Croppa's demeanor on the stand was as important as her story. If the jury wasn't able to see her halting and uncertain delivery, how were they to judge her credibility? Judge McCartan was unmoved. Croppa's testimony would be read into evidence.
Rodney remains calm in the courtroom, but is privately fuming. How can the jury not see what's before them? This fabric of lies woven by the DA's office to keep him behind bars. No one saw him with Robin Samsoe, not one witness. The police sketch shows a man who could be half the men in L.A. No one can prove it was him taking photos on the beach that day. And so what if he cut and straightened his hair? Or rented a storage space? The state's case rests on nothing more than the fractured memories of a disturbed young woman who thought she saw him on a mountain road one night. Her story changed with every telling, though now the state has stacked the deck against him. The jurors won't be allowed to see her shaky performance. Her testimony from the first trial is read to the jury by the court stenographer. And then there are the earrings. It always comes down to those earrings in his locker. How can anyone prove they aren't his? In fact, he can prove they are. Rodney straightens in his chair as his lawyer presents the centerpiece of his defense. A minor buzz goes through the courtroom as a TV is rolled in and turned on. Defense attorney Monroe pushes a VHS cassette into an attached player, and the screen lights up with a tape of Alcala's 1978 dating game appearance. Everyone in the courtroom is riveted, no one more so than the defendant. He seems to enjoy briefly reliving Bachelor No. 1's winning performance. The purpose is to show the jury Alcala regularly wore an earring, but it proves unhelpful to the defense. His ears are obscured by his long hair. On May 24th, both sides present closing arguments. Defense counsel stresses the inconsistencies in Dana Croppa's testimony, how she was manipulated by the police, and how her psychological state renders her an unreliable witness. Prosecutor Goethals talks about Alcala's identification by witnesses at the beach, the photos he took of Robin an hour before her disappearance, his suspicious behavior following the crime, his rental of a storage locker in Seattle to stash the earrings, and the cane-cut knife found near Robin's body that is similar to ones found in the Alcala home. This time, jury deliberations take 4 days. On May 28, 1986, Alcala is again found guilty of murder, false imprisonment, and use of a knife as a deadly weapon. He is also found guilty of the special circumstance of kidnapping, making him eligible for the death penalty.
The Dating Game Killer is brought to you by Best Fiends. Best Fiends engages your brain as you solve fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. It's fun anytime you play, but I'm especially thankful to have Best Fiends on my phone for all those moments of downtime that would otherwise be boring or unproductive. I know you know what I'm talking about. Those times when you call the power company and the stated wait time makes you want to just bang your head against a wall. Believe it or not, Best Fiends can make that wait time not just bearable, but fun. And it's not just me who loves it. Best Fiends has been downloaded over 100 million times and is 5-star rated. There are thousands of levels to play already, with new levels, events, and characters added every month. It's hours of fun right at your fingertips. You can even play offline. So if you're finding yourself with some time on your hands, I can't recommend this game enough. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends. We get support from The Real Real. You can own iconic luxury items at unreal value with The Real Real, the leading reseller of authenticated luxury consignment from top designers like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Rolex, Cartier, and hundreds more at up to 90% off retail. Shop and consign women's and men's luxury fashion and streetwear, as well as fine jewelry, watches, art, and home. New items appear on the site daily, and every item undergoes The Real Real's meticulous authentication process. In fact, The Real Real employs over 100 brand specialists, gemologists, horologists, and art curators from around the globe who inspect thousands of items each day to ensure that every item is authenticated. I was browsing the website today for jewelry, and I noticed that you can sort by price, which I love. And I saw this beautiful Kate Spade statement necklace, estimated retail $98, just $45 at therealreal.com. Oh, and if you're a consigner, you can set up a virtual appointment today with The Real Real's luxury consignment team. Get 20% off select items with the promo code REAL. That's therealreal.com, promo code REAL for 20% off select items. Before the penalty phase began, Rodney Alcala petitioned the court with a 49-page document of his own invention. He complained that his defense attorneys had been incompetent. He declared he was severing his relationship with them and asked the court to dismiss the case. The judge denied the motion. Though the California Supreme Court had ruled Alcala's criminal record inadmissible in the guilt phase of the trial, nothing prevented prosecutors from using it during the penalty phase. Deputy DA Goethals described the defendant as the epitome of malevolence, a sexual carnivore who preys on totally defenseless young girls. To bring home his point for the jury, he produced a witness with first-hand experience of Alcala's brutality. For the first time in 18 years, Rodney Alcala came face-to-face with Tally Shapiro. No longer a helpless child, the 26-year-old woman took the stand to confront her attacker. Firmly and in a clear voice, she told the court how the defendant had lured her into his car, then kidnapped her. How he brought her back to his apartment and knocked her unconscious. How he raped her and beat her so savagely she would have died had it not been for the timely intervention of Good Samaritan Donald Haynes and LAPD officer Chris Camacho. After a brief recess, it was the defendant's turn to address the court. In a soft voice, he pleaded with the jury for mercy. He admitted having molested young girls in the past, admitted to the rape of the 15-year-old Hoyt, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with Robin Samso's murder. He asked the jurors to consider his 13-year record as a model prisoner. "I am absolutely harmless," he told them. "I'm not a threat to hurt anyone. Please don't kill me. I don't think I should have to die for something I didn't do." Finally, Rodney Alcala's mother stood up and approached the bench. Looking small and frail, she told the court she fully believed in the innocence of her son. She described the boy she knew as quiet, studious, and kind. He had served his country in the army. She looked at the jurors and her eyes filled with tears. She told them she hoped they would find it in their hearts to spare the life of her child. It took jurors one day to decide Alcala's fate. On June 20th, 7 years to the day after Robin Samso's disappearance, they delivered their sentence: death. Judge McCartan had the authority to overrule them, reducing the sentence to life without parole. He considered the defendant's history and declared him incapable of changing. He affirmed the jury's decision.
As years pass on San Quentin's death row, the one-time dating game winner seems no less interested in self-promotion. In early 1990, he grants an interview to a reporter, sharing details of his daily routine. He tells her there's a small track in the exercise yard where he runs laps. He also does aerobics in his cell to stay in shape. He has a color TV and enjoys watching sitcoms and romantic comedies like When Harry Met Sally. He makes a point of telling the reporter he avoids shows and movies with violent content. But most of his time is spent researching possible avenues to appeal his convictions. He has a typewriter which he uses to file court motions. He frequently applies his jailhouse lawyer skills to petition for such items as toothpicks and dental floss. He presents a stoic front, but considers himself an aggrieved party, made to suffer for a crime he didn't commit. But any fear of execution is tempered by the knowledge that no one has been executed in California since 1967.
Time ran out this morning for Robert Alton Harris, convicted of the 1978 shooting deaths of 2 teenage boys in San Diego. Harris had spent 13 years on death row before his appeals finally ran out.
In April 1992, Rodney's confidence receives a blow when Robert Alton Harris is executed in California's gas chamber for the brutal murder of 2 teenage boys. And in December, the California Supreme Court, now absent Rose Bird, rules that Alcala's conviction and sentence will stand. Rodney shifts his writing skills from drawing up legal briefs to a new work. You, the Jury, is a self-published book that details the travails of a man languishing on death row for a crime he didn't commit. Told in the third person, it describes a legal system gone awry and asks readers to decide the case for themselves. The 300-page volume is replete with illustrations, witness lists, and footnotes, and concludes with a demand that its hapless protagonist receive a new trial. Rather than a self-serving effort, the book purports to be in the interest of correcting a process that has become a mockery of our unequaled American justice system and our great Constitution. It's available by mail for $24.95. There's no record of how many copies are sold or how the jury of readers decides the case. Alcala will wait another 7 years until a decision is rendered on his petition to overturn the 1986 murder conviction. On April 30th, 2001, a federal district court overturns the verdict. Once again, the testimony of Dana Cropper was pivotal. The court rules that by reading her testimony into evidence, defense counsel did not have the opportunity to cross-examine her. This prevented Alcala's lawyers from fully developing their theory that Crappa had been influenced by the police in constructing her version of events. After being twice convicted and twice sentenced to die for murdering Robin Samsoe, Rodney Alcala is granted a third trial. The state is given 120 days to retry the case, either that or set Rodney Alcala free.
Matt Murphy might have preferred to be out surfing. From what he could see out the window, it was another fine California beach day. But in the spring of 2003, the young Orange County Deputy District Attorney was sitting at his desk preparing for the third trial of Rodney Alcala for the murder of Robin Samsoe. Though the state had appealed the ruling to overturn Alcala's conviction, prosecutors needed to move forward with their case, pending a decision by the Ninth Circuit Court. As Murphy went through the files from the earlier trial, the phone on his desk rang. It was District Attorney Tony Rackauckas. For a moment, the young prosecutor didn't understand why his boss was talking about a 26-year-old murder case. Georgia Wickstead had been found raped, tortured, and strangled in her Malibu apartment on December 16, 1977. In 2002, a law had been passed allowing officials to collect DNA samples from prisoners and enter them into a database in hopes of solving old cases. Rackauckas paused dramatically before revealing the purpose of his call. DNA found on Georgia Wickstead's body was a match for Rodney Alcala's. Murphy took a long moment to let the news settle in. Authorities had long suspected Alcala was responsible for other unsolved murders. Now it was confirmed. Murphy could only wonder how many more there were, but he knew this changed everything.
June of 2003 does not go well for Rodney Alcala. He gets word that the Los Angeles District Attorney is filing new charges against him for the 1977 murder of Georgia Wickstead. The charges of burglary and rape are special circumstances, making him again eligible for the death penalty. By the time the Ninth Circuit of Appeals upholds the lower court decision granting him a new trial, DNA evidence links him to 3 more horrific crimes. When Jill Barcomb's body was discovered nude and posed on a road off Mulholland Drive in late 1977, she was initially thought to be a hillside strangler victim. In 1978, Charlotte Lamb's body was left in the laundry room of an El Segundo apartment house. And in 1979, Jill Parento was found murdered in her Burbank apartment. All 3 cold cases are now conclusively linked to Alcala. That makes 5 known murders attributed to him. Rodney Alcala is officially a serial killer. On November 22nd, Alcala enters court for his arraignment on the charges of rape, torture, and murder of the 4 LA women. At age 62, he spent almost 2 decades in prison for his various crimes. He wears glasses, and his hair has gone gray. But he speaks in a firm, clear voice when he pleads not guilty to all charges.
On January 13, 2006, Judge Frank Briceño presided over a hearing that would have profound implications for both sides in the upcoming trial of Rodney Alcala. From the beginning, the Samsoe case had been within the jurisdiction of Orange County, but the 4 newly discovered murders had been committed in LA County. Though law enforcement agencies often acted as rival fiefdoms, Orange County prosecutor Matt Murphy and his LA counterpart Steve Cooley felt it was in the state's interest to combine the cases under one jurisdiction. Since Alcala was already set to be retried for the Samsoe murder, they agreed to enfold the LA homicides into the Orange County trial. Alcala's attorney George Peters argued against consolidation. He knew that without Crappa's testimony or Alcala's criminal history, the state's case was weak. But the DNA evidence in the LA cases was compelling, and it would only prejudice the jury against his client in the Samsoe case. In May, the judge rendered his decision. The trials could be combined. Alcala and his team immediately appealed, but the California Supreme Court ultimately affirmed the ruling. The 5 murder cases would be tried together. Alcala's lawyers had little time to lament the ruling. Now their client was petitioning the court to represent himself at trial. Prosecutors believed the new round of motions was designed to delay justice as long as possible. Alcala seemed determined to die of old age before ever being executed by the state. And there might have been another reason behind his desire to represent himself. Chief among the causes for appeal was ineffectiveness of counsel. Was Rodney hoping to act as his own lawyer so that if convicted, he could then file an appeal based on the poor quality of his representation? The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with Alcala, ruling he had a constitutional right to defend himself. He would be facing Orange County prosecutor Murphy in the Samsoe case. Los Angeles Deputy DA Gina Satriano would handle the 4 LA murder cases. Satriano was familiar with being in the spotlight, having worked the Courtney Love assault case and the Mel Gibson drunk driving case. She was known as a fierce competitor, Now she looked forward to what the state hoped would be its final contest with the multiple murderer.
It's not until January 11th, 2010, that Rodney Alcala once again appears on a national stage. Presiding Judge Frank Briseño has allowed cameras into the courtroom, and Rodney will get to show off his jailhouse lawyer skills as he defends himself. His gray curls fall past his shoulders, as they did 30 years ago in his dating game appearance. But gone are the leisure suit and wide-lapelled shirt open halfway down his chest. Today's performance calls for a well-tailored tan sports jacket and pale blue shirt. A conservative striped tie has replaced the gold chain of earlier times, and he's wearing dark-rimmed glasses. What remains of Bachelor number 1 is his self-confidence, his belief that he can bend fate to his will. He sits patiently at the defense counsel table while prosecutor Gina Satriano makes her opening statement. If the details of his crimes shock jurors and spectators, Rodney betrays no emotion, even as Satriano projects grisly images of the murders onto a screen in the darkened courtroom. Satriano speaks in a soft, calm voice, making eye contact with each juror. She describes how horrifically the victims must have suffered, and how the degradation continued even after their death, how their murder opposed their corpses to create maximum lurid effect on whomever discovered them. But what neither he nor investigators knew at the time was that decades later, the DNA collected from the scene would single him out, to the exclusion of all other humans on the planet, as the murderer of the 4 women. By the end of the trial, Satriano tells the jurors, the evidence, the law, and their own common sense will lead them to the proper verdict. They will find Rodney Alcala guilty on all counts.
Witness after witness testifies for the prosecution. Some are friends or family members of the slain Los Angeles women. Prosecutor Satriano knows the importance of reminding the jurors that before meeting Rodney Alcala, the victims were unique individuals with fully rounded lives, that their hopes and dreams didn't matter to him, that their futures were cut off, all to provide him grotesque sexual satisfaction. Throughout the proceedings, Alcala watches impassively, occasionally taking notes. He rarely cross-examines witnesses other than to ask if the victims were wearing earrings. If he has a strategy, it's opaque to courtroom observers. Prosecutors then attempt to shed light on how Alcala might have targeted at least one of the women. Catherine Franco takes the stand and tells the court that she and her friend Jill Parenteau frequented the Handlebar Saloon in Pasadena. On several occasions, Alcala asked the young women if they wanted to dance. Shortly after Parenteau's murder, police showed Franco a photo lineup and she pointed to Alcala's picture as the man who had approached them. Once again, Alcala asks the witness if the victim wore earrings. Then he ends his cross.
Rodney looks up with renewed focus as Bridget Goldstein takes the stand. Under Deputy D.A. Murphy's questioning, she tells the jury about the afternoon of June 20th, 1979. She and Robin Samso were at Sunset Beach when a man claiming to be a photographer approached and asked to take their picture. Less than an hour later, Robin would go missing. In his cross, Alcala asks Bridget how she can be certain the man at the beach was him. At 43, she is not afraid to look him dead in the eye. "It was you," she says so sharply he is momentarily taken aback. Then he gets to the subject of the earrings, asking her to step over to the easel set up to display photographs and evidence. He directs her to look at pictures of the earrings found in his storage locker. When he starts to ask if Robin was wearing earrings that day, Bridget cuts him short. 12-year-olds don't always pay close attention to the jewelry their friends are wearing, she tells him. Rodney has her turn away from him several times to re-examine the photos. He takes his time, directing her to look at one photo or another. When she looks back at him, he has a little smile on his face. He instructs her back to the witness box and watches as she takes her seat. Then he dismisses her from the stand. Witness after witness identifies Rodney as the photographer seen at the beach around the time of Robin's disappearance. Though he tries to create uncertainty in their memories, they remain resolute. They tell him to his face he was there. His only satisfaction seems to be getting the female witnesses to do as he tells them. Again and again he has them step over to the easel, look at the photographs, look at that one again to be sure, return to the witness box. He even seems to enjoy the authority he commands in dismissing them from the stand. Then he scribbles on his legal pad and awaits his next turn. When Robin's mother Marianne steps into the witness box, the already somber proceeding takes on an added sense of gravity. She is a reminder of how the events of 3 decades ago are still achingly present in the lives of victims' loved ones. In a soft voice, Deputy D.A. Murphy elicits from her memories of her daughter, Robin's hopes and dreams, her kindness and intelligence. Then he asks about the day she was told Robin wouldn't be coming home, and how she had to identify the blue and white tennis shoe found by the skeletal remains. The prosecutor lets Marianne's words settle over the jury, then lets Alcala begin his cross-examination. Rodney shows little deference to the mother of the slain 12-year-old. He asks about different hair lengths Robin might have worn, persisting until Marianne shouts at him, "What difference does it make?" Then he gets to the central line of questioning. Does she have any photos of her daughter wearing earrings? Marianne scowls at him and says, "You know whether she had earrings on that day, don't you?"
The courtroom is hushed as a slide of Robin Samso's remains is projected onto the screen. Craig Robeson of the Huntington Beach Police Department describes for the jurors how little was left of the child after 12 days out in the open. He testifies that a cane-cut carving knife was found a few feet from the body. It bore traces of human blood, though not enough for analysis. But police gathered rocks, soil, and leaves stained with blood that was later found to be consistent with marrow extracted from Robin's bones. Not far from the skull and torso, searchers found a child's tennis shoe and an entire head of blonde human hair. A crumpled beach towel was later identified by Marianne Fraser as belonging to her daughter. Bloodstains indicated it might have been used to wipe a straight-edged blade clean. Again, the blood was consistent with Robin's bone marrow. When asked if Robin was wearing earrings the day she disappeared, Robeson answers there is no way to know that. Her killer had left her body to be eaten by animals. Not even her earlobes remained.
Rodney Alcala waits until the state rests its case before delivering his opening statement. Remaining seated at the defense counsel table, he begins by telling jurors it's been 10,850 days, 5 hours and 15 minutes since Robin Samso left Bridget Wilvert's home, never to be seen again. And that 33 days, 16 hours later, he was arrested and charged with Robin's murder. Since then, he's been incarcerated, most of the time spent on San Quentin's death row. He speaks in a soft voice, reading from notes. If the jury is moved by his suffering at the hands of the criminal justice system, they betray no sign of it. He then uses his laptop to project a homemade video called The 6-Minute, 15-Second Window of Opportunity. The production purports to demonstrate how he couldn't have kidnapped Robin, since he was dozens of miles away applying for a job at Knott's Berry Farm. Bit by bit, he attempts to dismantle the state's case against him. He claims the police sketch, which in part led to his arrest, looks nothing like him. The earrings found in his storage locker were actually his, not Robin Samso's. In fact, there's no evidence her ears were pierced. His opening remarks last over an hour. At no point does Rodney mention the 4 other murders he's being tried for. If Alcala's opening statement was rambling, his defense case is perplexing. He calls to the stand a crime lab technician who testifies that cut marks on the earrings identified by Robin's mother could have been made by a pair of nail clippers she owned, though not to the exclusion of another pair. Sketch artist Marilyn Droz verifies that she created the composite of the photographer on the beach, but Alcala asks no follow-up questions. It's only when his one-time girlfriend, Elizabeth Kelleher Moore, takes the stand that Rodney seems to focus on his duties as defense counsel. Speaking of himself in the third person, he has the witness confirm that she dated Rodney Alcala in 1979, and that on June 19th, she helped him prepare for an upcoming job interview at Knott's Berry Farm. But he asks her nothing about the following day, the date of Robin's abduction. When Alcala dismisses her from the stand, he returns to the central theme of his case, the matter of the earrings. He calls 2 of his former co-workers at the Los Angeles Times to testify that they saw him wearing earrings, though they say they don't remember the style. A third says the earring might have looked like the ones found in his storage locker. As the centerpiece of his earring defense, Rodney has the room darken and asks the court to play a clip from his appearance on the dating game. He tells the jurors to watch closely because the earring is visible past his hair for only a flash. But he fails to pause the video on the relevant frames and admits it's hard to tell what style earring he was wearing. But Rodney has prepared the most bizarre moments for his final witness. He calls to the stand Rodney Alcala. If jurors and spectators thought the defendant's dating game appearance was odd, it was only prelude. For the next several hours, they are alternately entranced and bemused by the spectacle of lawyer Alcala questioning defendant Alcala. As if there were 2 people in the room, he addresses his client by name. "Rodney, would you please tell us about your hair?" he asks. "What did you do on June the 15th? "Rodney, what did you do on the 16th? "Mr. Alcala, after you spent time with your sister, what did you do?" As with Elizabeth Kelleher, he elicits precise testimony regarding his whereabouts on June 19th, the day before Robin went missing. But when it comes to the 20th, all the witness allows is that he was at Knott's Berry Farm for a job interview. Seeming quite satisfied with the performances of both attorney and client, he turns the witness over to the state for cross-examination.
Prosecutor Matt Murphy is not as gentle on cross as defense counsel was on direct. He challenges Alcala on virtually every point. He asks why the defendant lied to police about taking photos on the beach, and about what he was doing the day Robin disappeared. Why did he dramatically change his appearance shortly after the police sketch was released? Why did he suddenly find it necessary to remove the carpeting in his car? Why did he drive 1,000 miles to Seattle to rent a storage locker? Even more damaging than Murphy's grilling is that by testifying in his own defense, Alcala allows the state to use his criminal history to challenge his credibility. He has no choice but to admit that he was convicted of child molestation in 1971 and rape in 1979. But when Murphy accuses him of knocking Robin off her bike so he could abduct her, Alcala denies ever meeting her. And when you were bashing her in the teeth, Murphy asks, was she crying or was she already unconscious? For the first time in the trial, Alcala's facade of calm cracks. I never met Robin Samso, he shouts back. Murphy lets Alcala's angry words settle over the courtroom. Then he asks the defendant how earrings bearing the DNA of murder victim Charlotte Lamb ended up in his storage locker. This time, Alcala has no ready answer. He stumbles for a beat, then tells the prosecutor he'll explain it to the jury later. It's a promise he won't keep.
He's got no soul or feelings. These are first-degree murders. When you're talking about a guy like that, who is hunting through Southern California, looking for people to kill because he enjoys it, he gets off on the infliction of pain on other people.
On February 22nd, Matt Murphy begins his closing argument. Looking at each juror individually, he describes the method Alcala used to kill his victims. Strangulation is not a spontaneous act of violence that might erupt before a perpetrator has time to think. It takes long minutes for the victim to die, more than enough time for the attacker to contemplate his actions. The act itself is proof of premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt. And Alcala took pleasure in inflicting pain upon his victims. The 4 women whose bodies were found intact all showed evidence of extreme violence and torture. It will never be known what young Robin had to endure since he left her for the animals to devour. But science caught up with the killer, Murphy tells the jury. Samples of body fluids were collected and stored from the 4 LA victims, and decades later traced to the same man. Charlotte Lamb's DNA was found on a pair of earrings hidden in his storage locker. Another pair was identified by Robin's mother as belonging to her. The killer has escaped judgment for 40 years. Now it's up to the jurors to put an end to it. It's time to pay for all his crimes. But the deputy DA finishes by focusing on his last murder victim, the youngest and the one who led to his capture. Robin Samso's day in court is today, Murphy tells them. You can make sure that Rodney Alcala is held responsible for what happened to that little girl.
Part of what gets that guy off, it's not just the conquest and the sneaking around and the rape and the killing and the torture and the sadistic infliction of pain. He wants a free murder. You're going to convict him of the LA cases. He knows that. Everybody knows that. But Robin Samso's day in court is today.
In the aftermath of a shocking crime, people always ask why. Who would do something like that? Was it about power, ego, revenge? What makes people like that tick? In Wondery's new podcast, Killer Psyche, retired FBI criminal profiler Candace DeLong dissects the thoughts and motivations of the most infamous felons in history. With a career spanning nearly 5 decades, she sat across the table from hundreds of criminals and spent countless hours inside their minds. In every episode of Killer Psyche, Candace will unravel the psychology and instincts of America's most complex and disturbing figures, including high-profile cases that she personally worked on, like the Unabomber, and other cases like Christopher Dunch, a.k.a. Dr. Death, where her training and experience can help us understand what was going on inside his head. Was he delusional or a cold-blooded killer? To hear the gripping details of the most chilling criminals' minds in modern history, follow Killer Psyche on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen to new episodes early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.
After a brief recess, it is defense counsel Alcala's turn.
The 4 Los Angeles cases is a device for secretly and dishonestly attempting to control the outcome of the unrelated Samso case. Magical thinking.
Rodney begins his closing argument with a rambling discourse on magical thinking. Speaking softly and occasionally glancing down at his notes, he tells the jury that the state's case against him is a fabric of gimmicks and lies. The description of the photographer at the beach given by witnesses differed on virtually all details: his height and weight, his complexion, the clothes he was wearing. Then he gets to the centerpiece of his defense, the earrings.
No testimony from anyone other than Mrs. Frazier that Robin's ears were pierced. None of her friends were aware of that. They were unaware of her wearing earrings. And Mrs. Frazier had plenty of opportunity to provide you, the jury, with a picture of Robin wearing earrings.
Rodney asks the jurors to find compassion in their hearts for the distraught mother. It seems he harbors no ill will toward the woman whose testimony helped put him behind bars for the last 30 years. He stresses that he doesn't see Marianne as a bad person. She deserves empathy and sympathy because she lost her daughter. However, he concludes, it doesn't give her the right to make up a story. After 3 hours, Rodney finishes by telling the jury that he can't think of a single thing he's told them that was willfully false. At no point in his closing argument has he addressed the murders of the 4 women in L.A. or the DNA pointing to him as their killer.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Rodney James Alcala, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
Deliberations take 1 day. On February 25, 2010, the jury comes back with guilty verdicts on all counts in all 5 cases. Rodney maintains his quiet demeanor, showing no visible reaction. A week later, on March 2nd, the penalty phase begins. L.A. Deputy D.A. Gina Satriano's argument is straightforward. If the brutality and viciousness of these crimes doesn't warrant the severest penalty the state can impose, what does? Each of the murders involved special circumstances, and they followed a long criminal history of violent acts against women and girls. She reminds the jurors of the horrific details of the crimes, then asks them to deliver a punishment no less severe than what he gave his victims. Then she calls to the stand Monique Hoyt. As a hitchhiking 15-year-old, Hoyt made the mistake of accepting a ride from Rodney Alcala. Now at 46, she is still fragile in the presence of her attacker, requiring a police officer to sit near her as she takes the stand. When she is handed a photo showing the bite marks left by Alcala, she uses it to block him from her sight. She describes the rape and beating in detail, then defense attorney Alcala is allowed to cross-examine her. He reminds her that he apologized to her following the attack. Still unwilling to look at him, she says that his apology was meaningless and fake. He seems perplexed by her unwillingness to accept his attempt to make amends. Before meeting Rodney Alcala, Tally Shapiro was a happy 8-year-old on her way to school. As she takes the stand at age 50, she has no memory of what happened after he struck her from behind. She remembers him pulling his car over and telling her he had a beautiful picture to show her. She remembers getting in and being taken to an apartment in West Hollywood. And she recalls looking at a photograph when the world turned black. She tells the jury that though she survived physically, she has never been able to trust people or form lasting relationships. Rather than cross-examining the witness, Alcala apologizes for what he calls his despicable behavior. Tally is not afraid to meet his eye, and she is not interested in his apology. Following a brief recess, jurors hear from family members of the victims. Charlotte Lamb's sister Celia talks about seeing the ligature marks around Charlotte's neck as she lay in her casket. Dee Dee Parenteau tells how she collapsed upon hearing of the murder of her baby sister Jill. Georgia Wickstead's brother Michael describes the horrific chore of cleaning up the blood in her apartment. Her sister Anne tells how their mother needed to be under psychiatric care for the remainder of her life. Maurice Barcombe talks about looking into his sister's casket, despite his parents' warning, and not believing the mutilated body inside was Jill's. Robert Samso tells the jury he still misses his sister Robin every day and every night. Her death destroyed their family and ended his childhood. Alcala asks no questions of the witnesses. Matt Murphy concludes the state's case by asking if the defendant deserves any less punishment than what he meted out to his victims. Describing Alcala as an evil monster with a narcissistic personality, he reminds jurors of how long the murders took and how the killer would choke his victims to the brink of death, only to bring them back to prolong their suffering. He finishes by asking the jurors to do the right thing. Alcala needs to be held responsible for his crimes and given the only appropriate penalty: death.
I want to kill. I want to see blood and gore and guts and veins and want to eat dead bodies. I mean, kill.
Lawyer Alcala's argument against the death penalty is no less eccentric than his defense of client Alcala. He tells jurors that by sentencing him to death, they would become a wannabe killer in waiting, part of that elite group of citizens who desire to share in the killing of a human being. Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the courtroom, he plays a section of Arlo Guthrie's 1967 song, Alice's Restaurant. In it, the protagonist feigns a crazed bloodlust in a misguided attempt to convince a psychiatrist he's unfit for military service. The point seems lost on everyone except Rodney, but highlighting the song's invocation to kill strikes observers as an ill-advised strategy for a man just convicted of murdering 5 human beings. But Alcala's defense doesn't rely solely on musical interludes.
Let me put the death penalty in perspective for you. If you desire to join in the killing of a human being, you and the families of the victims will have to wait at least 15 to 20 years while the case slowly churns through the appellate process.
Seemingly oblivious to the irony, he uses his own 40-year history of appealing the death penalty as an argument against the death penalty, based on the length of the appeals. A sentence of life without parole, he tells the jurors, would end this matter now. Before finishing, he reminds them of their solemn duty. This is probably the most important decision you will ever make, he says. Choose wisely.
Remain seated. Court is again in session.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, determine that the penalty to be imposed upon defendant Rodney James Alcala to be death.
The jury takes only an hour to sentence Alcala to death. Robert Samso shouts yes, and there is applause in the courtroom. 3 weeks later, Judge Briseño confirms the jury's decision, ruling that death is the only appropriate penalty. As part of the proceeding, members of the families are allowed to make victim impact statements. Alcala shows no reaction as one by one, they step up to face him directly. Robin's mother finishes her statement by turning away from Alcala. "The world needs more children like my Robin," she says, her voice still shaken with grief after 40 years. But never another murderer like Rodney James Alcala. Judge Briseño follows the family statements with some remarks of his own. He tells the court that he was in Vietnam in the late 60s and wasn't listening to protest songs. He recalls the lyrics from Alice's Restaurant played by Alcala for the jury during the sentencing phase. When Guthrie's character in the song expresses his desire to kill, 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 it's meant as a satirical statement against the war. But to Rodney Alcala, the words are an anthem. They reveal his deepest truth. This is his state of mind, the judge says. This is his feeling. This is who he is.
Following his sentencing, Alcala was led out of the courtroom in shackles and returned to San Quentin's death row. In January of 2011, a New York grand jury indicted him for the murders of Cornelia Michael Crilly in 1971 and Ellen Hover in 1977. In both cases, DNA linked him to the crimes. A year later, Alcala pled guilty to both crimes and was sentenced to 25 years to life. In September 2016, he was charged with the 1977 murder of Christine Thornton in Wyoming. Her photograph was recognized by a family member among the 120 released to the public after his conviction. Alcala is considered a person of interest in murders in San Francisco, Washington State, New Hampshire, and Arizona. At age 75, Rodney Alcala is in declining health. He lives in a 50-square-foot cell a few yards from the room where he is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection. It's a lifetime away from the national stage he enjoyed after winning the dating game. Cheryl Bradshaw decided not to go on that date with Bachelor number 1 after meeting him backstage. She said she found him creepy. His victims did not have the opportunity to turn him down. He lured them into his car, followed them home, crept through their windows at night. No one on the dating game staff looked into his history, nor had anyone at the Los Angeles Times. All they saw was an affable young man with a charming smile. Cheryl Bradshaw looked past the smile and trusted her instincts. No one knows if she would have been one of his victims. No one knows how many more are out there. Some investigators believe Alcala is one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. The only one who knows for sure is Rodney Alcala. Robin's mother, Marianne, did not get her wish to see Rodney Alcala executed. She died in 2015 while Alcala was still pursuing appeals of his death sentences. But on October 19, 2014, she was at the Huntington Beach Pier for the unveiling of a memorial plaque honoring her daughter. It is yards from where Robin used to play in the sand and imagine her life as a ballerina. This is episode 6 of 6 of The Dating Game Killer from Hollywood and Crime. If you like what you've been hearing, be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. The Dating Game Killer was written and directed by Larry Brand and produced by Rebecca Reynolds, Tracy Patton, and Jim Carpenter for Hollywood and Crime. Recorded and edited by Julian Nicholson. Designed by Mark Nieto and Eric Cifuentes. And mixed by Mark Nieto for the Invisible Studios, West Hollywood. Executive producers, Marshall Louis, Stephanie Jens, and Hernan Lopez.
I'm John Stamos, and I want to tell you about a new podcast I'm hosting called The Grand Scheme, Snatching Sinatra. Back in 1963, Barry Keenan was broke, alone, and desperate to save his family from personal and financial ruin. In a final Hail Mary attempt to set things right, Barry rolled the dice on an elaborate scheme so bizarre that it's hard to believe it actually happened. He kidnapped Frank Sinatra Jr. This is a complicated story of one imperfect man trying to redeem himself by pulling off the perfect crime. We get a first-hand account of what it's like to see a harebrained scheme like this from start to finish from the guy who concocted the scheme in the first place. And Barry shares every detail, every plot twist, every goofy character he conned along the way. The Grand Scheme premieres on July 27th on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you're listening right now. Or you can binge all the episodes right now when you subscribe to Wondery Plus and the Wondery app.